Michal Hatuel-Radoshitzky, do I say that correctly?
Yeah, that's
okay,
right.
I'll go for that. From the Neubauer Research Associate at the Institute for National Security Studies. Welcome.
That's correct. Thank you.
One of the things, Michal, that has really affected Israel with this BDS is governments and private organizations listening to those voices from various private organizations in boycotting certain organizations from Israel, including huge organizations, huge funds such as Norge Fund in Norway and Scandinavia, as well as other organizations. If we just go closer to home today, the BDS actually published an announcement where they said that now one of the security companies being employed in Jordan, which is just neighboring Israel, is now also going to be boycotted because it is, according to the BDS movement, one of those organizations which they define as committing atrocities against civil rights, so on and so forth. How do we see this epidemic actually evolving?
Look, the BDS, boycott, divestment, and sanctions, what you're speaking about is the divestment leg. There certainly is a divestment leg. What Omri referred to is more the boycott leg, and we see that in campuses, and it's very different because in campuses, you go to a campus and it's all over and people can feel it. Whereas the divestment leg is quieter, they work very much under the radar. If the campus is a lot of people influencing a lot of people, or at least attempting to influence a lot of people, in the divestment leg, we have a number of individuals who handpick specific companies, and there they target also only a number of the top level individuals, and there they have very strategic work in picking out the companies and then in moving forward to have them divest from Israel.
Mrs. Hatuel-Radoshitzky, when we're looking at the situation in the European Union, just a few months back, the European Union has announced the labeling of products manufactured in West Bank settlements. At the same time, it tried to emphasize to Israel that it's not a boycott, rather labeling of the products themselves that came out of the result. One of the results was the BDS movement, which was also putting a lot of emphasis on this and trying to push their legislators in order to move this forward. And also another technical thing that was moved forward in the United States as well was also the labeling of products from West Bank settlements. Of course, they calmed it down as quickly as possible and tried to shove it under the rug as a figure of speech. Do we see more and more countries moving towards doing that in trying to really tell the people in their countries, listen, we might not be able to boycott them, but here are the tools in order to do that?
No, so I think here this is you hit the chord, because I think that there's a difference between what we see in the street and what we see in the governments and in the institutions. At the moment, the street is a far more extreme anti-Israel sentiment than we have in the institutions. The labeling of products from settlements has been in the pipeline for 13 years, as far as I know, and it's taken a long while, and it has nothing to do with BDS. Now, it's one of the strategies of BDS is to capitalize on things that are happening in the world and take it into to their advantage and say that it was them or whatever. But if you hear the representative, the ambassador of the European Union here in Israel, he has said endlessly that it has nothing to do with boycotting, that the Europeans are not boycotting Israel. It's a policy of branding their products to inform the consumers. And I think that on the legislation side, the pro-Israel camp is actually reaping more success than the anti-Israel camp. We have, even in Britain now, there's legislation which has passed that the government will not fund any organization that supports BDS.
I'd like to give you the opportunity, Mrs. Hatuel-Radoshitzky. I keep having a hard time with the second part there. How do you view Israel maneuvering within the constellation of all those different movements? Of course, we have also pro-Israeli organizations such as Stand With Us and other organizations who are trying to go and explain, as Mr. Maniv explained also with trying to explain Israel better and believe that we're in the right. That's why we should explain better. And then we have also other organizations which come out from J Street and other organizations that have more of a goal in order to try and change the policies within Israel in order to try and influence the outside. How do we see that?
I'll respond to that in a minute. I do just want to correspond 1 second with what Mr. Oren just said regarding the BDS being a movement that, if I understood you correctly, supports the two-state solution or is against a specific policy of the Israeli government. The BDS movement has underlined 3 specific goals, which clarify that they don't want Israel to exist in its current format as the state of or a homeland for the Jewish people. The first goal is the yielding of all occupied Arab lands and the dismantling of the security barrier. We don't know what all occupied Arab lands are. We don't know if they're referring to the 1967 borders or the 1948 borders, and it's ambiguous on purpose. It's not a mishap. The second goal is that they profess is full equality to Israel's Arab citizens. Of course, Israel's Arab citizens are equal before the Israeli law. But here they reference the AAM, the anti-apartheid movement, which worked to liberate South Africa from the apartheid regime. And here they try to make Israel equivalent exactly to apartheid South Africa. And the final goal is Resolution 194, the UN Resolution 194, which speaks about the right of return of all Palestinian refugees to their homes and territories. Now, of course, if all these 3 goals were to happen, and then the BDS would dismantle their movement, Israel would cease to exist as we know it today, at least. So they're not advocating for a two-state solution. They're not a pro-peace. They are advocating against the current status quo. Yes, I completely agree with that. But let's not mistake and think that this is a pro-peace movement. It certainly isn't. That's as far as the BDS goes. Now, regarding the anti or the counter-BDS camp, the pro-Israel camp, basically the pro-Israel camp entered the game very late. We see that in South Africa, South Africa started labeling Israeli products from 2001. We are in 2016, and this has been going on in South Africa since then. And South Africa is, so to speak, the poster boy of BDS. But BDS has been around for quite a while in Europe and in American campuses as well. Israel has entered the game quite late. There are multiple pro-Israel organizations, not necessarily always in sync, not necessarily always with the same narrative. The counter-narrative is much simpler. Israel equals apartheid, free Gaza, free Palestine, and so forth. So the counterfight is more difficult, it's more complex, and there's certainly a lot of lessons to be learned, yes. I think that they always try to compare themselves, like we said, to the South African struggle. But if you look at the South African struggle, the ANC, which wanted to liberate South Africa, spoke about, firstly, the ANC Charter is very inclusive of South Africa. The situation was different there because the solution that they strive for is the rainbow nation, for everyone to live together. Whereas here, what we want to do, at least what both governments and the world agrees upon, is the two-state solution. It's to separate. But in the ANC Charter and the narrative of the anti-apartheid movement was to free the white man from the shackles of apartheid. So it was speaking morally also to the white man, not something that is going to change the game completely. Whereas if you see the BDS, there's no narrative, there's no inclusive narrative of what will happen to the Israeli side, to the Jewish Israeli side. There's no concern, or there's no at least attempt to facilitate the security concerns of Israelis living, or Jewish Israelis living in the area. I think one of the byproducts perhaps of BDS is the rift in the Jewish community, specifically in the US. I think that there's a you mentioned J Street before, but J Street, for example, I think is the last stop before one will approach BDS, because J Street enables an environment where you can be pro-Israel, but you can also be critical of Israel, whereas a lot of the other organizations are very hesitant with that. And I think that's definitely one of the byproducts of BDS. I think what we see today in the polls is that the younger generation in America is drifting away from Israel. They don't relate to Israel as the asylum or the need to have Israel as a safe haven for the Jews, because they don't feel persecuted. They haven't grown up with feeling persecuted. So it's very different. And I think there's a different narrative between the older generation, which is more pro-Israel and is very reluctant to perhaps criticize Israel or Israeli policies, whereas the younger generation feels a bit more detached. Just very quickly, 2 points I'd like to make. One point is that it's not the BDS, it won't work, because when Israel is pressured into a corner, then the Israeli and the Jewish side comes out that we are persecuted and that we will always live by the sword, and this is what strengthens the extremists and weakens the peace camp.
We're out of time, but thank you so very much for coming here, Mrs. Michal Hatuel-Radoshitzky. Thank you so very much.